Slapping the bass, man.
There you go.
Slapping that bass, man. I slapping that bass.
Welcome to the Beer, Rum, and Rock and Roll podcast. Saving rock, one conversation at a time. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on Apple, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, and X. What do you think of my new light show? You like that?
This is fantastic.
Right?
It's like, is this also where you host your swing parties?
My key parties.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I can go home with somebody else's wife and disappoint them. Is it laundry day with that shirt?
Okay. Why not kiss up to the guest? I mean, come on.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to help you sell shit. Look at that.
Yeah, there you go. Wow, look at that.
Okay, let's start this like a professional. I'll pretend I'm a professional. You ready?
Go.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Beer, Rum, and Rock and Roll podcast. I'm your host, Randy Legault, and back again for his very first Beer, Rum, and Rock and Roll Top 10, all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, my special guest host, the powerful and attractive TODD DAMMIT KERNS.
How are you, brother? How are you?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm good. I have completely failed the top 10, by the way, because I in no way sat there and top 10'd it. I just wrote down a million things and thought, oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one. And then I'm hoping you'll help me assemble it in some sort of fashion that will make sense. I literally have like almost 30 things written down. They're like, oh, that's a good one. Ooh, that's... I did not understand the task at hand, and I just ran with it. You asked me to build a cabin, and I built a village.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So everything cool in the Dammit universe? Everything good?
Everything's groovy. Can you believe it? I'm actually at the tail end of a week off. It just sort of kind of came out of nowhere. So I was just sort of, came home from the Slash tour right into a bunch of, right in the Rock Vault immediately sort of grabs my attention. And then I ran off to the Czech Republic, the band, this band called Black Sonic Pearls. Their name always, it's got elements of Black Sabbath. No. Sonic Youth? No.
Pearl Jam?
Pearl Jam? Yeah. I'm always stumbling over it because I'm like, it's such an interesting name. But they're these guys from, oddly enough, from Russia. And they're these really cool guys I got to know and very talented guys I got to know on the road. And they opened for us. And they said, hey, dude, we're playing this festival in the Czech Republic outside Prague, a town called Plzeň. And would you want to come over? I mean, I'm like, what? What is it? At first, I'm kind of like, metaphorically on my hammock, back from the road going like, I'm not going anywhere, dude, but it turned out to be really fun. And it was, the guys from Five Finger Death Punch, Las Vegas' own, were there. So I got to go and hang out and it was pretty fun. They're a really cool band and they really have a lot going on. So I was like, I got to know them on the road. It's funny how like you make these connections on the road. If I'd never met these guys, I never would have went over to that festival and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a funny old world. You get to know people like Randy Legault and next thing you know, you're talking on a podcast 1,000 years later. Yeah, I mean, there's something about Europe in general. People will tell you how rock and roll is dead, and then you go to a giant festival somewhere, and they're, it's alive and well here. Yeah.
Right. Okay, man, let's do this. Being a badass bass player yourself, I thought you'd be perfect to have on this countdown of top 10 bass riffs of all time.
You got that half right. Bad bass player.
I do what I can. Oh my God. Okay, man. Well, you're the guest. Why don't you start, man?
Well, it was like when we actually started talking about riffs and stuff like that, it became kind of like, it's such a difficult conversation because there's a lot of things songs that are built on, I was like, I want to have some examples. So I brought in, this is Dee Dee, named after Dee Dee Ramone.
Awesome.
Everybody thinks it's an actual Dee Dee Ramone signature bass, but it's not. It's just like a 90s P bass that I bought off Craigslist here in Vegas one day. My friend sent me the Craigslist. He goes, dude, this is 100% Dee Dee Ramone. I go, cool. I sent the guy a message. He comes over to my house. He goes, hey, are you the guy from the Sin City Sinners? I go, yeah. And he gave me a deal on the bass just because he liked the band. I go, oh, cool, thanks. But it's, I brought in a fretless bass, and I brought in a 12-string bass for different criteria. Whether you want me to make a bunch of racket. Plus, it sounds like Lemmy to, set up my rig in here. It's one of those things where I really honestly didn't I think hoping you can help me curtail this into a list, because a lot of the time, what's a good bass riff is such a conversation of like, is it a riff itself that sort of almost sort of created the song, which happens all the time, or is it just some whatever the bass player is playing within that thing that creates its own thing, which I think is a bit of both. You know what I mean? So bass riffs, that's a tough one. So
Yeah.
you're probably going to help me go like, okay, well, that's kind of a cool part, but it's not really a riff. And I have so many guys that I look up to and so many players that I look up to, and it's hard to go like, well, this is a good example of what his best riff is. I go, I don't know. This
Right.
Like, I remember doing like one of the Eddie Trunk Canadian round circle talks, and Sebastian Bach's like, dude, you didn't even mention Max Webster. And I'm like,
How dare you?
Dude, there's it's 1,000 things to talk about, and Max Webster would just kind of got away from me, bro. I'm sorry.
Right.
But that's what'll happen on here. I'll be like, dude, what about this guy? And what about that? And I'll be like, that's why I've got some generalized ones here. Let me get the generalized ones out of the way, because I'm kind of like,
give me one.
Like Tool. That guy's nuts. That guy's so cool.
Justin, yeah.
I'm not going to attempt to play that, but that stuff is nuts. Every time I hear it, I go like, oh, this is like, I'm up there in my yellow belt watching this 6th degree black belt, you know, and I'm like, wow,
Totally.
okay, that's a whole other thing. The guy in Muse, you know, the band Muse, Hysteria, what's that song called? It's nuts. It's like, it's so impressive. It sort of opened up that side of my brain that goes like, who plays way up here? And I go, oh, those guys play way up there. You know? And I'm like, I'm pretty impressed with that kind of playing. It's just not my wheelhouse, but I'm always blown away by that. Rage Against the Machine, Audio Slave, Tim Comerford. I think he's also a monster player. And it's really hard to come up with like, what is his best riff? Because in reality, a lot of his riffs are, you know, him and Tom are doing something that's simpatico in a sense. What I call, you know, flying in uniform together kind of thing. So I kind of treat that as kind of like those guys are just, they're their own animal. Primus, Les Claypool, of course, deserves his own. I don't even know what's going on. Like, I look at that stuff and I go, what is happening over here? It's like, you know,
oh, dude, yeah.
He's in a whole other world of his own.
He's such a freak. So I had Tommy the Cat. I love that riff. Oh my God.
There's so many. It's like, that's why I couldn't possibly narrow it down to one. That's why I just have Primus.
I can remember in the early 90s, I was 91 when Sailing the Seas of Cheese came out, I think. Somebody put that on at somebody's house, and I couldn't really wrap my head around it.
Same.
Like that screechy guitar and stuff.
Yeah.
But then the switch went on. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like it took a bit, right? It took a moment.
Yeah. It was very Zappa-esque in its own way. Like it was like they were doing their own thing. It wasn't necessarily meant to be, well, it's hard to say it wasn't meant to be taken seriously, because musically it's very serious, but they had their own sense of humor, tongue in cheek.
Well, if we're just going to freewheel like this,
I would be happy to hear your top 10, and I would just kind of like sort of spew all over it. I probably should have done a top 10, but I was sort of like, there's no way I can reduce this down to 10 parts, you know. You should go. You should steer this ship away from the iceberg.
Exactly. The fucking Titanic is about to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my criteria, because like you said, there are so many. I stayed away from funk, soul, R&B, and disco. There's way too many.
That's one of my top 10s. I mean, it's one of the greatest riffs.
Wasn't that another one, Bites the Dust?
That's another one. Those two right there are very good examples of chic, good times. And another one, Bites the Dust by Queen, is good examples of a bass riff that sort of probably drove the entire thing.
You probably know this, but John Deacon was hanging out with Nile and Chic at the time, and word on the street is he ripped that off, which is why I said, like, the beginning of it is very similar.
100%. Yeah. We'll say it's an homage, you know, it's inspired by, yeah.
Not rip off. That was a bit aggressive, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit aggressive.
And I also thought, well, I went riff first. They're not necessarily my top 10 favorite bass player.
I'm very curious to hear yours. Yeah, I mean, because I'm the same way. There's things on here where I'm like, that I was talking about where I go, well, I love this guy, but there's a lot of players that I love that I wouldn't say necessarily that they have a riff necessarily or anything like that. Or sometimes I'm not really into this group, but this is a cool riff.
Totally. I like this, man. I'll give mine and you could comment on mine and add. This is going to be cool. This is all right. Okay, my number 10, this guy you've worked with.
I hate him already. Just kidding.
From Megadeth's 1986
yeah.
Peace Sells But Who's Buying, I went with David Ellefson's opening riff on Peace Sells.
Of course.
For a metal track, it's funky as hell. It's awesome.
It's really over the top. I've had to play that song before. we played this corporate event once with Slash and the guys, and this person was like, the guy in charge would really love to hear Peace Sells by Megadeth. I'm like looking around, he hired Slash for this? And of course, the weird thing is, it's like, I kind of know that song. Right. Yeah. I go, let's do it. Which is basically like at the end of the song, when the song speeds up, he's basically doing that riff at the beginning of the song in sort of a more of like almost a bit of a slappy kind of funky type thing. Dave's a very underrated player, honestly. I think he's one of the most underrated rock bass players there is, and a wonderful guy.
Yeah, he is underrated for sure. Really great parts he comes up with, man. Like, he uses a pick, and I feel, especially on this song, you need a pick for this riff to cut through Mustaine's guitars and shit. Like, I think you kind of need that pick attack. What do you think about that? Maybe talk about the difference between using your fingers and using a pick.
Well, that's always the funny thing to me, is some people get this real sort of attitude about, like, you know, you have to play with your fingers or, you know, whatever. And I'm always sort of like, I mean, there's so many examples of great players, from Chris Squire and Paul McCartney and all kinds of guys who play with picks. It's sort of what you're more comfortable with. I always like the attack of a pick. It's just sort of my jam. Dave is one of those guys that I think that definitely cuts, but at the same time, I would imagine if Trujillo or someone like took a stab at that,
sure,
I think it would probably cut through just
fine.
Right. Yeah. It's all dependent upon like the person's technique, but I will hand it to Dave Ellefson, Dave Jr., that he came up with that part or played that part, so he wins.
Okay, man, I'll go to my number 9. It's off Black Sabbath's 70 debut. I went with Geezer Butler and NIB. I know that's low-hanging fruit, but man, that riff is off the charts.
That's on my list too. It starts with something they call Basically.
That's right.
It's so funny because I just finished Geezer's book recently, and I was just kind of blown away by the fact that he said he didn't really know what he was doing. Like, he says that people ask him all the time, like, what kind of amp are you using? What kind of, and he'd be like, I have no idea, dude. I go, like, he would just plug in and play and record. Back in those days, he probably could barely afford, you know, any of it. So I think he just sort of like, it was all the mother of invention, you know, just kind of, this is just how it's going to go. And what I always find fascinating about Sabbath is the fact that, you know, when you get into, you know, all their riffs really dictate the melody. So they would say how, like, well, Ozzy would come up with the melodies and Geezer would write the lyrics. And I'd always kind of giggle like, well, so some people say my love, that, you know, it's like, it's following the riff, or like, has he lost his mind? You know, it's like the melody is sort of already there.
Do
whether Tony, yeah. Whether Tony or Geezer came up with the riff, I assume Tony. But I was about to say Geezer's underrated, but I don't think he's what we would call underrated. I think he's probably the greatest heavy metal bass player of all time, but he's also just a great bass player. Like, his parts are very clever. Like those moments in the middle of Sweetleaf where they just all go off in solo directions. It's like Geezer's holding his own. You know, Geezer is no joke. He's like shredding away as well. But that's on my list as well. NIB is definitely on my list. So I think we've connected there.
And it's cool. He's got that wah going, and the fuzz is cranked too, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a cool tone he's got going on there.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think, other than the wah pedal, which of course went on to be like Anesthesia with Cliff Burton and stuff.
Right.
Eventually they did make a bass wah pedal, which I always kind of giggled at. I was like, you know, it was sort of like, well, the guys were already using the guitar wahs and doing crazy stuff with it. It's very much like when you start talking about gear, like the Marshall 412 guitar amps and stuff like that. Like, John Entwistle was one of the first people to be playing those things with a bass guitar, because it wasn't really about tone, it was about volume.
That's right.
Yeah, like, it wasn't until later that he said, well, maybe I get more low end than this, you know, whatever. But I think that there's something so interesting about those early days of the Jimi Hendrix Experience or The Who and those kind of bands where they were really literally inventing the wheel at the time of how this was going to go. But anyway, I digress. You got me on
That's all right, man.
3 coffees in and talking about bass playing. Here we go.
I want to mention the word swing, because, man, Sabbath swings. It's not just bludgeoning you. It swings, man. It's awesome.
Well, it is funny. It's one of those things that, you know, when people start talking about, say, drummers or bass players, they tend to miss people like Bill Ward or
Oh man.
Ian Pace, guys like that really often get overlooked. I know we're talking about bass players, but it's the same with Glover or Geezer. Geezer's it's such an obvious one that we all, well, yeah, of course, Geezer Butler. We all kind of go, yeah, you know. But that said, it's sort of one of those things where those guys, and I really do believe that the same with Led Zeppelin, where it's sort of like these guys didn't grow up learning heavy metal songs. They grew up learning jazz and blues and stuff like that. So all that kind of stuff has a swing to it. So when they started doing their thing, which was just louder and heavier, it all sort of has the same sort of backbone and backbeat to it that I just think creates that swing. It's not really as mysterious as we think. It's just sort of like that's what those guys grew up playing, and that's how they play.
And before we leave Geezer, I want to talk about, like, he does this thing where he smacks the strings down towards the fretboard and gets that kind of a clack thing. That's pretty cool, right? I mean, it's very distinct what he does.
Yeah. And again, I think it's all just sort of his thing. I don't think that he was sort of sitting around taking lessons from anybody. There's a finger player who definitely has his own thing. It's funny because I was just reading a thing recently about like the invention of the Fender Precision bass and how a lot of guys were like, "Oh, this fad will never last." It's kind of like these guys they're putting the upright bass on top of their car driving to the gig, and it's like, but you can put this in the trunk. It's like, and the guy's like, "Oh, that'll never last, that old fat." But I understand it because it's like anytime somebody brings something new in, it's sort of like, what? But a lot of that technique that guys would be using in an upright bass, which there's one right here. I don't use it.
I see it there. Yeah. Can you stand on it and play?
I've never tried. I honestly picked it up because I was such a straight cast Lee Rocker fan. Actually, I didn't even put Lee Rocker on the list because it's such a whole other animal. But what Geezer's doing, I think, might come from an upright bass, even though I don't think he started on upright at all.
Totally. And not to sidebar, I'm just thinking of that style. Reverend Horton Heat, I remember I've seen them a few times, and their guy, I don't know what his name is, he goes crazy with that thing. He spins it around, he's standing on it. It's a whole thing. Like, it's crazy.
That scene is, that's what you do. It's like, it's not just how you play it. It's part of the show. Yeah. They're next level, those guys. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. My number 8, you mentioned him already, is Tim Comerford. Off the debut, Rage, Take the Power Back.
Oh, yeah.
Zach De La Roca comes in, bring that shit in, and holy fuck, does he ever, man.
I know.
He doesn't play a lot of slap, but this one is slap, and the groove is just insane. You know it. It's unbelievable what this guy does. Bring that shit in!
I don't think enough can be said about that band in general. I just was telling the story of how we were at, I want to think it was either Rock am Ring or Rock im Park, a major festival in Europe, and Rage is on it. And it's one of those where, they're going to do a run and you're like, oh my God, And it was just fascinating, standing side stage. We had played earlier in the day. It goes to show you the impact they have because I'm standing there. Every band is there. Muse is there. Like Muse is standing on the side of the stage. It's like we're all just sitting there like in class taking a course from these, high professors. And it was fascinating because Brad's drums all looked like from different drum kits. Like it looked like a high school band. Like the drums are all fucked up. Tom's strings are sticking out the top of his headstock, as he does. Everything looks real kind of like they just loaded out of a van. But the power coming off those 4 guys was so intense. And I remember we were all looking and we would look at each other like, oh my God. And, I'm looking at, the guys from Muse, like we're just kind of, wow, like what we're witnessing. I don't know those guys at all, but I'm just kind of like, wow. And then we would look out at the audience and watch this rolling mass of humans, just the power of that. Because I think it's really interesting. Like if Zach had if he had just been with a DJ and doing more like a hip hop type thing, it would have been just as powerful in another way. But the fact that they had been able to create this whole thing as a rock band made it something completely different in a way that I don't think that the rap rock thing really quantifies what rage is. You know, I mean, it's kind of like Rage's entire power of what that is coming from Zach, what he's singing about, you know, all these kind of things. But the groove that those guys have, and I think Tim is such a big part of that. And the same could be said for when they went on to do Audio Slave as well. They really are very interesting and very unique unto each other. You know, I mean, like, I think that there's something very special that those guys have. I think they know that. And I think it's sort of like unfortunate that we can't have it every single day for the rest of our lives. But
It really is.
you know,
Yeah.
there's a reason why, you know, we didn't get to see the Beatles after 1970. You know?
That's right.
So,
Yeah, it's too bad, man. Yeah, his tone and his power, like you said, and they're awesome at
insane.
they leave space. So like taking away the guitar, so when the bass comes in, it's fucking
Yeah.
huge, right? They do a lot of that.
It really is.
It's
Yeah.
kind of minimalistic that way, and it's just powerful as hell. Like I think they're more about the rhythm and not so much the melody. I don't know if you agree with that. And Tim is a huge part of that.
I mean, obviously the melody isn't really going to be in the vocals because it's a rap, a hip hop style rap,
Sure.
as opposed to a vocal. And I suppose in that case, Tim and Tom have to come up with these sort of melodies, but
Right.
it's so powerful. It's undeniably like one of the most powerful bands. Honestly, when people ask me, I go, that was the most intense thing I've ever experienced in my life. And it just seemed like they're just such normal dudes that they just walk on stage, and then you just realized, oh my God, you know, it was as if they just pulled out Excalibur and like, oh wow, these guys are like Jedi Knights. I had no idea.
Yeah.
You know, I've never seen anything like it. And I mean, we watched Muse, we watched all those bands, and I think there's almost sort of like an expectation when you go to see these bands. Okay, well, these guys are going to be great. And I think that we all went, Rage is going to be great. We know Rage is great, but there's something almost sort of like just the collection of those four guys was just like, holy.
Yeah.
I was just blown away, you know, and I don't think I've ever seen anything like it since or before.
Well, you say that. I got the notch in Vancouver at Plaza of Nations. Remember that venue? Of course you do.
Of course, yeah, I played there. Yeah.
Evil Empire tour. So this is they're just peaking here, right? And it was
Wow.
bananas, like almost
I bet.
too much. Like they had to stop the show at one point. They're like, "Hey, we don't want you to beat the fuck out of each other here. Just enjoy yourselves," because there was guys throwing elbows and bloody noses. It was mayhem. Like the power they had on that stage, I've never seen anything like it.
And it is that kind of show. I mean, it is that kind of, there's something about that level of music that really sort of taps into that side
Yes.
of it too. The aggression, you know, it's so funny because now it's sort of like people kind of like realize what they were actually singing about is actually like very important to guys like Zach. But I think sometimes people just hear like, you know, noisy, loud stuff and they decide, I'm just going to go fucking nuts. But I think that's what rock and roll is supposed to do anyway, you know?
That's right. It's one of those albums that I remember when I heard it. Like a buddy of mine goes, "Have you heard of these guys?" I'm like, "No." He goes, "I know you don't like rap and that kind of shit, but just trust me, put it on." It was a cassette, and I put it on side 2. So "Know Your Enemy" was the first song I heard.
Yeah.
And within seconds, I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about it. But yeah, it was off the hook. I'm like, I'm in.
You know what's one of the funniest things? This is a totally stupid story, but the Sin City Sinners. I don't know if you ever saw the Sinners play, but
Of course I did. Yeah.
okay, yeah.
A few times. Yeah.
Our drummer Rob was absolutely hilarious. Rob Boom Boom Cornwallier, because he was so unplugged. He was a jazz guy that I somehow convinced to come play with us, man. It's gonna be fun. And he's like, he'd never heard fucking Sweet Child of Mine before. You know, he was like, he'd probably heard them, but in very, you know, in passing. He was not a rock and roll guy. But he's a complete anomaly. He's a kook. He's his own guy. And one day he says to me, you know, for years, I didn't know what he was saying at the end of, what's the big obvious Rage song?
Killing in the Name.
Yeah, Killing in the Name of. He goes, at the end of the song, he goes, for years, I thought he was saying, and this is this is the example of how smoking weed, checked out. He goes, I thought he was saying, fuck you, I'm the dude with the tow truck.
Oh my God.
And I go, what? I mean, he's saying this to me with a straight face, like, fuck you, I'm the dude with the tow truck.
Man.
Wow, he's pretty aggressive about owning a tow truck. And I'm
Why
like,
is this guy so angry about that?
yeah, exactly. He's going to tow your truck. You're parked in a no parking zone, I guess. And I just remember being like, you know, just immediately into the memory banks, like press record.
This takes it up a notch from "There's a Bathroom on the Right" or whatever. CCR.
Exactly, yeah. Revved up like a douche. Yeah.
Okay, number 7. This guy had to be on the list. The riff intros the song. That fast galloping style became Iron Maiden's trademark. It's fast, but still has groove. I went with Wrathchild off Killers, 81. I mean, dude, that riff is killer. No pun intended.
I just had a conversation with somebody the other day who was kind of like, I didn't get Iron Maiden until Peace of Mind or something like that. Like they kind of like, they weren't really into them until, and I go, dude, you better go back, man. You got to go back. Because we, as kids, we were already into like, you know, I mean, somebody played Wrathchild was the first song I'd ever heard. And I was like, what the fuck is this? The cool thing about Steve is that from what I understand, he's got flat wound strings, which is unusual in rock. But because he has that attack, like the way you were talking about Geezer, their whole sound is based around Steve's bass playing, and he writes a majority of the songs and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to think that, you know, something like such an early song like Wrathchild really defines his playing in so many ways. And because it's the riff, I assume all the riffs, or most of the riffs, are actually coming from the bass because Steve writes the riffs or has written a lot of the songs. But yeah, that song is a perfect example. And I was such a fan of the Di'Anno years, to the point that I remember being kind of like, they're getting a new singer, being really bummed. I mean, we were kids. We were like literally children. But it was like, obviously, first time you heard Number of the Beast, you were like, oh, okay. Well, yeah. But there was a minute there where you're like, but I love that dude. I like that. I love this band. What are they doing? You know, I would say the same thing when they replaced Clive Burr. We were like so disappointed. And then we put on the first song on Peace of Mind is, and you're like, oh, okay.
We're gonna be all right.
We're gonna be all right. Course correction. We're okay.
Yeah.
But I think that early Maiden doesn't get enough love.
I agree. It's fast. It's got a whole different energy to it, I think. They became a different band in a way.
It really did, yeah.
His accuracy and precision and timing, all those things are crazy. He's always fucking right on it, hey? Unbelievable.
Absolutely. There's so much going on there that it's a whole other thing. I think a lot of kids picked up the bass because of Steve.
Totally. And to go with at those tempos and that fast with your fingers is insane. Like, it's really crazy.
Absolutely.
And he's another guy who plays the P bass, as you know. He's got a real growl to his tone. Mm-hmm. And that you mentioned it, that clack again.
Yeah.
It's just an iconic sound. You know it in 2 seconds. You know it's him.
You do. Every time you hear one of their songs, you're like, you can hear that in there and you go, that's driving the whole thing.
Okay, man, my number 6, I had to get Flea in here. I mean, you could throw a dart at their fucking catalog and it's going to be a great bass riff, but I didn't go with Higher Ground and I didn't go with Give It Away, believe it or not. This is a bit of a wild card, Todd. I went with that song off Young MC's Stone Cold Rhymin', Bust a Move.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah.
That bass line, I love it.
Of course, Flea is on my list as well. I think that he's another example of like a lot of guys picked up the bass because they went like, who is that? You know, in a lot of ways, I felt like Flea was the most, you know, besides Anthony, in a lot of ways, was the most standout member of the band as far as like what's happening in that sound. Obviously, you know, in retrospect, Frusciante, but there was so many different versions, you know, before the Frusciante was even part of the team, we were kind of like, you know, Real Men Don't Kill Coyotes and Fight Like a Brave, all that kind of really early stuff. We were like, what is happening? Who are these guys? If you would have told me those guys would have been a mainstream act of any sort, I'd have been like, you're out of your mind.
Playing stadiums, yeah.
They were so outside when they came out. We were like, these guys are awesome. I love these guys. I mean, the guys with the socks and they're always constantly shirtless. And yeah, they're nuts, but it's like, there's no way we would have thought. I actually do have Give It Away on my list because I remember that crossover where Blood Sugar Sex Magic was sort of like, they really kind of came into the zeitgeist of everything. You know, obviously the Mother's Milk record was beloved. You know, we all love that record, but there's something about Blood Sugar Sex Magic that was like, oh, these guys, they are very much their own thing. And I think that he is another good example, like Steve, of guys who everybody went like, who's that guy? What's he doing? You know, and he's a totally different thing because, of course, the funk thing, when we talk about like Rage, there's also a hip hop element within Red Hot Chili Peppers, which is kind of funny now because it's not as much a part of their sound in the modern sense as it was back then. There was all kinds of rap. I mean, that's what Anthony was sort of known for, was kind of this, you had a real rap kind of element to it. Eventually the melody thing started to kind of take over, but yeah, it was all funk. It was all groove. And when they found that lineup with Chad and with John, it became, okay, well, that's the sound. And he's a monster player. Like you say, when he suddenly he's playing on something else, like that Alanis song. I didn't even know that until somebody one day goes, that's Flea playing on that. And you go, of course it is. It's just like, it's so obvious once you hear it. You're like, yeah, of course that's Flea.
And like you mentioned Blood Sugar, there's so many different flavors on that album. Like, it's not just the same thing over and over. It's diverse. No. It's incredible. Yeah.
No. I haven't gone back to it in a while, but I remember at the time being like, oh, we're in a whole other world. Of course, that was an exciting time of crossing into alternative music. And that's where I said, okay, if you told me in that moment that these guys are going to go on to be a mainstream act, then I would have been like, oh, okay, well, yeah. It was just so outside. Like, it would be like if there's 10 people in the room, 2 of you are going to go, this is awesome. And the other 8 are going, what the hell is this?
Yeah. A little fun fact. He got $200 for that, playing on that track. That was it. There you go.
What? That's hilarious.
And who doesn't like a guy with stuffed animals all over his pants? I mean, come on.
That's the other thing, is that literally the image of that band, they were their own animal completely.
Well, it's fun. They just exude fun.
They do, yeah. That's why it translates.
In the city, ladies look pretty. Guys tell jokes so they can seem witty. Tell a funny joke just to get some play. Then you try to make a move and she says no way. Girls are faking, goodness saking. They want a man who brings home the bacon. Got no money and you got no car, then you got no woman. And there you are. Some girls are sadistic, materialistic. Looking for a man makes them opportunistic. They're lying on the beach perpetrating a tan so that a brother with money can be their man. So on the beach you're strolling, real high rolling. Everything you have is yours and not stolen. A girl runs up with something to prove, so don't just stand there, bust the move.
For my number 5, this has nothing to do with Flea. He's the quiet one in the band, but what a talent. John Paul Jones. Of course, I'm with Ramble On of Zeppelin 2.
Sure.
I mean, dude.
Yeah. Actually, that's on my list too. My tone's way too distorted for that. It's once in a while there'll be this kind of like, long road trip conversation about like, okay, let's talk about, there's almost like you could take a band. Who would you take out of that band? Led Zeppelin is that band, and Queen. You can't take anybody out of that band.
No.
I mean, I know that John Paul Jones probably gets the short end of the stick in so many ways, but if it was 1969 or whatever year it was, and Jimmy Page got, I don't know, the guy from Free to play bass, we may not have noticed the difference. But
right.
To take him out now would be like, absolutely not. John Deacon, same story, because of course John Deacon wrote a lot of hits too. But I say that about so many bands. It's like imagining any of your favorite bands without them. It's just one of those dumb road trip things.
Well, look at Zeppelin's a prime example of that. Bonham dies, and that's it. That's it, man. You can't replace it.
No, you can't at all. Yeah, that's a tough conversation. It's sort of like, well, I mean, maybe if JPJ had died, maybe they might have, I don't know. But I don't think that that's, like you say, I assume that Page is just playing that acoustic riff in Ramble On, and that's what JPJ starts playing, and it's kind of like, dude, there's the song. It's like, if he didn't play that, it would be like totally other animal. And I think that's kind of the beauty of taking into account that JPJ also was a multi-instrumentalist and sort of created a whole other thing. But
yes,
he definitely deserves to be on the list. Absolutely.
That's a really moving melody, man. And the riffage during the chorus is amazing too.
Absolutely. Right? He's doing all this kind of like crazy moving around. Yeah.
It's very Motownish, I thought. It's got that vibe to it.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with that. He's another one of those guys that has a very round tone. Like it's not necessarily piercing it in your face, but it's covering a lot of frequencies with that tone for sure.
Okay, we've mentioned him a few times already. For number 4, I had John Deacon, another one bites the dust off the game. I mean, dude, if you're not tapping your foot to this, you're not wired right. Like, come on, let's face it.
It's so funny because I've heard that Roger Taylor was totally not into it. And from what I understand, the drum take is a complete loop. If you listen to it now, you can hear it sounds like in the way that Staying Alive by the Bee Gees or a lot of things were sort of built on loops at that time because it created a real groove. And I think Roger Taylor was so not into it that he was kind of like, played his part and was like, I'm out of here.
Well, that makes perfect sense because one of my notes was Roger Taylor keeps the drums really simple to let the bass shine through. Simple. Let's just loop it. I'm out of here. I'm going for lunch.
Yeah, he's like on the golf course.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm 100% correct on that, but I believe I've heard that. That's the perfect example of John Deacon. Plus, I believe those songs, well, obviously Another One Bites the Dust, doesn't exist without that bass line. It is the song. And a lot of the melody, Steve walks way down the street with a dun, 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 is all based around what the bass is moving and doing.
Yes.
And then like Under Pressure, I believe, feels to me like he was just playing that and they built a song around that riff.
Right.
Which is another great example of what I was just talking about. You cannot replace John Deacon because of You're My Best Friend, I Want to Break Free, Another One Bites the Dust, all those songs that he created. And there's also from the same album, I mean, it's funny to look back on that because, you know, we were kids when the game came out, but it was so bitchin'. But that's a cool thing about Queen. And I said to my wife the other day, it's so weird how, like, you know, I'll be listening to Stone Cold Crazy going, God damn. And then I'll be listening to, like, 39 or some weird, like, you know, like they would go so light and so heavy in the course of one record. You'd be like, is this the same band? Yeah.
Which is so interesting. And let's face it, not many bands can even do that. They couldn't even attempt that.
I think it's the example of the kind of freedom that they gave each other. You know, I mean, I think
Yes.
the fact that often Brian May was the rock guy,
Yeah.
a guitar player, you know what I mean?
Right.
But he wrote a lot of light stuff too. And then Freddie was a piano guy and could go off into that world. And,
Right.
but then you got the drummer who's writing Radio Gaga and like, I'm in love with my car. You know, it's like they all have songs. And I think that if there had been anybody who was like, I'm the songwriter, that it would have been one-dimensional as opposed to that 4D thing that those guys had.
Well, yeah. And how many bands have guys that skill?
Yeah, it's very rare. That's why there's only one Queen.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Steve walks slowly down the street, people wait all over. Ain't no sound but the sound of his feet. Machine guns ready to go. Are you ready? Hey, are you ready for this? Are you standing on the edge of your seat? Out the doorway, the bullets river to the sound of the beat. Hey, yeah, yeah. Sing. Another one bites the dust. Sing. Another one bites the dust.
Okay, number 3, of course, I had to get Getty in here. Had to be on the list, but I didn't go with YYZ, Todd.
It's sort of the obvious one to go to, but again, you could throw a dart. There's so many Getty things that you're just kind of like, obviously. But that song, well, it says so much about the band, doesn't it? It's sort of ridiculous, really. I mean, like, that we were lucky enough to have lived in a time where those guys were making music because when they get into the you know, and then there's also like little bass solo things, bling blong, you know, with harmonics and stuff. It's just like, it's just ridiculous. I mean, because I read his book too, and I was very fascinated by the fact that he was, you know, obviously he was into guys like Chris Squire and guys like that, but he very much created his own thing too. Like he definitely was sort of inventing his own wheel as he went along, tone-wise, and managed to create something that everybody emulates. All of us to this day, every time what is he doing in there? Like, what tone is that? Like, that's technically, and you get all these nerds that are like, that's technically his jazz bass. It's a 70, you know, you're like, what? You know, through this amp, it's, you know, you're like, okay, and we all sit there and stroke our beard about like, what is going on here? It's like, there's Rush nerds like there's Beatles nerds. Nothing kills me more than the guy, well, technically that's, you know, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's like Star Trek talk.
Well,
yeah.
to be contrarian, I was going to pick Digital Man off Signals. Do you know that one?
Of course.
Man, you talk about walking up and down the neck. It's
Yeah.
crazy what he's doing in that song.
And the most painful part of it all is that he's also singing and playing bass pedals and then moving over to the keyboard and remembering the lyrics and singing. It's like, I watch those concerts like how is this happening? I mean, it sort of unfortunately restricts Getty a lot of the time. Like he's sort of stuck in one position sometimes. And Alex can only do so much because they're a 3-piece. But it's really impressive.
Something I want to mention is he doesn't have a light touch, man. He really digs in. Like he's hitting that fucking thing. And he's great at ghost notes, like little flourishes between the main riff.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, it's just badass.
It's actually funny that you say that because not a lot of guys know that. But those kind of like ghost note is such a drum expression. But Getty's one of those guys that everything's so rhythmic. And I don't even think he's really thought about that. I think he's just doing his thing. And so every once in a while, there's these kind of ghost notey type things that he is just kind of like, it's part of his rhythm and part of his flourish of what he's playing. I mean, he's a very, very special individual. Like, it's almost silly to kind of like, Geddy Lee's a good bass player. Like, come on. It's like, yeah, we know that sort of like Bruce Lee, it's like, it's like one of those conversations with Wayne Gretzky. You're like,
Yeah, I read Geddy's book too. I really enjoyed it. One of my favorite parts, I'm paraphrasing, of course, is he's talking about how he would dream that, what if I could just play bass? Just play bass, not all this other shit.
I know. Yeah. Like he said, he went and did that thing with Yes, where he said at their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he was just in heaven. He was like, I just get to play bass. Awesome. It's like, I don't have to think about this, juggling, chewing gum, playing keyboards. It's like, just no, just go over there and play bass.
But then, of course, he flips it and goes, yeah, but then they'd be going, hey, could you fucking play less notes? You're fucking going crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Actually really kind of refreshing to learn in his book, and he talks about how like they would record the record and then he'd have to figure out how to do it live, because I do it all the time where I'm no Geddy Lee, but I'll record with Slash and the guys, and we'll go in and I'll sing all the harmonies, and then I'll come back out and go like, I never even considered the fact like I have to play and sing this at the same time now, so I really have to sit here and woodshed like playing the parts, so that I split the brain into like, this is the bass, that's the vocal. But I learned a lot of that from guys like Geddy. I was only like rudimentary Geddy, but I really went down deep rabbit holes with guys like Sting. Sting to me was like, I don't know if he's on your list, but he's one of my guys. His playing would be not necessarily indicative of what's happening vocally. And you would think to yourself, is this all studio trickery? Like, I know he doesn't have to do this at the same time as you. But I would watch live stuff and I'd go like, there he is. Driven to tears, this kind of like, and he's singing like this thing on top of it that's like, doesn't make any sense to be singing that on top, but he's doing it. Sting is a very underrated. I mean, we all talk about him as a songwriter and all that kind of stuff, but as a player and as a talent, I also have, I think a lot of his bass parts are so unique, and they dictate a lot of the songs too, because he often wrote the songs. It's kind of a weird one because The Police was so important to me, and Sting's solo was very sort of like, I liked it, but it wasn't my thing. The Police as a band is definitely in my DNA.
How can you say that you're not responsible? What does it have to do with me? What is my reaction? Why should it be confronted by this latest atrocity? Driven to tears.
Okay, man, my number 2, again, low-hanging fruit, but I went Mr. Sweet Emotion, Tom Hamilton off Toys in the Attic, Aerosmith. I mean, dude, if you haven't heard this riff, where have you been? It's just one of those iconic ones. And you alluded to this earlier. Like a lot of Aerosmith stuff, actually, their songs are based around the bass riff, I find.
Yeah.
And it's all credit to him.
Well, that one especially, because that is actually a Tom riff. Tom came up with that. They built the song around him. It's sort of one of those weird things where the focus is so much about Steven and then secondarily about Joe.
Yes.
That I think so much of the focus gets lost on them as a band. It's understandable because Steven is so special, but Tom is one of my guys. Like, even like stuff in like, there's all these like crazy things he's playing within the context of other songs. It's like almost every single song that Aerosmith does, Tom is doing something really cool.
Absolutely.
He's again underrated only because he happens to be standing behind, those guys.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, and it's so cool that opening, and you got Joe Perry playing that talk box over it. It's just, I never get tired of it.
Me either. Yeah. It's such a iconic rock and roll moment, isn't it?
And most importantly, it's the first thing you hear in the opening credits of Dazed and Confused. So I mean, that's
That's true.
you see
That
that,
is true.
you see
Yeah,
that
yeah.
GTO in the parking lot. It's just like, oh
Totally.
man,
Yeah.
just awesome,
It says so much about exactly that moment in time, doesn't it? Yeah.
right? Totally. Okay, my number one, and it was always my number one, and this is the example where I'm not really into his band, and it's Chris Squire from Yes off Fragile 71, Roundabout. I love this riff.
I know. Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like one of those. I think everybody from Doug Pinnick, I watched a thing where Doug Pinnick was like, he was just so fascinated that he had to go to a Yes concert to see what exactly, how is he getting that tone? And he said that like he loaded out, oh, there's a bass amp and a guitar amp, which is something we always do in a recording process, is having like an actual guitar amp for the high end and then the bass amp to carry all the lows and this sort of thing. But Chris was one of those guys. And I think that guys like John Entwistle and guys like Geddy were also playing in that world of like having, these kind of things. Look, when I was a kid, it was like, here's your bass amp, a TNT, PV, and you plug into it and go, why doesn't it sound like those guys? And you'd be like, so it was like an ongoing process of trying to figure that out. But yeah, no, there's something about that tone. I'm the same way. It's like, I like Yes. And there's like that, that kind of stuff. But I never went down that rabbit hole beyond like going like, that guy's a monster. He was kind of like,
Right.
I saw him at NAMM once and it was like, he was like Gandalf. He had like a long coat that looked like a cape. And he was white haired. And I was like, and it was like, whoa. We're like, whoa, that was Chris Squire.
Of course he did.
Exactly. Of course he did. Yeah. Well, in a weird way, like, because they were so proggy in a way that, sometimes it loses. I'm going to get a lot of, getting yelled at a lot here, but there's sometimes like guys like me who just like the rock. I think Chris brought that to that band. He brought that kind of like straight up, kind of like loud ass attitude thing that if he wasn't there, would have been a totally different band. That's interesting that that's your number one.
It is. The note choice and that pattern of that riff, there's something about it. It's awesome.
It's bitchin'. It's the whole song. I mean, honestly, without that, it's like, what is there in that? I mean, obviously the melody and the lyrics and all that, but I'm saying like that drives the whole thing.
Driving through the sun and in and out the valley. The music dance and sing. They make the children really ring. I spend the day away. Early morning driving through the sun and in and out the valley.
Here's a couple that you forgot though.
Okay.
I got to adjust that. It's the heaviest thing I've ever had. You know why? Because it's for this.
Exactly. Yeah, Lemmy.
There's something about wood and quite a few different things that
That was Mike Starr, right? Michael Starr?
that's Mike Starr. Thank you. There you go. Wow. Because Mike Inez gets a lot of love for that because Mike is a monster, but he's not on that recording. That's Mike Starr. I know that that's a Jerry song. He is the sole writer on that song, but that bass line, every time you hear it, you go, damn. And the tone is really cool. That's a very cool, but then the other Mike Inez is, which apparently on the recording is Bob Daisley. Isn't this weird? Apparently Mike Inez came up with that riff and they built a song around it, but for some reason it's Bob Daisley, who is one of my all-time favorite bass players. I steal so many things. I'll sit there and listen to Slash records, and actually I very rarely sit and listen to Slash records. Just sitting around my house. Hey, that's me.
I'm great.
But if it ever comes on, I go, I totally stole that from, Flying High Again or whatever.
Sure.
Because it's Bob Daisley's such a musical player and whatnot. That bass riff in No More Tears is, again, so indicative. That's the song. I assume that the whole thing is built around that. Same thing with... It feels like a real kind of like cop-out to go Ace of Spades by Motorhead, but it's... The bass opens the song. You're like, that's the song. You know, it's like, obviously the... You know, when he starts playing the guitar riff. And Lemmy is very underrated too, because a lot of the time he's going... He's playing chords and stuff like that, and I think people don't really realize how unique. I mean, it's so interesting because I would talk a lot about like his tone.
Yes.
And he would come and jam with us, and he'd bring Murder One, the Marshall amplifier.
Here it is.
And we'd be like, there it is. It's like, but yeah, exactly. Like it was like Stonehenge. Yeah. But I know later on they started to get into a world where they could take his tone and then start to create a little bit more low end with either an Ampeg or something like that. Because Lemmy was 100% like, that's not my tone. This is my tone. He didn't even, like, the bottom end. If you went to a Motorhead show, it kind of sometimes would lack a little bit of bottom because his tone was so over the top. But we love that about him, you know what I mean? This is the uniqueness of these kind of players that we're talking about, is that he's his own guy. That's how he plays, and that's how it goes, yeah.
Well, he plays more like a guitar, would that be, than a bass, really, right?
Kind of, yeah, yeah, very much. With the guitar pick and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Let me see who else I got on my list of things here.
Yeah, bring it on.
I've got so many different ones. You know what? I put this one down. I just thought, I was thinking of songs that start with bass. The very first Van Halen album, all it starts with that kind of Doppler effect. I think it's a car, if I remember correctly. Although it's the simplest and maybe silliest bass line of all time.
Well, you could play that one with your teeth, Todd.
Yeah, and he did.
I know.
And he did. Michael Anthony is another guy who is completely underrated, in my opinion. I'm not trying to make fun of the fact that bass line is so boneheaded, but dude, that is an effective intro to a song, in my opinion.
Totally.
And his bass playing and his voice is such a big part of it. That's another one of those things. It's like, in my opinion, it's a very different band when you start pulling members out of that band. And that's, you know, obviously that happens, so it's the conversation. But I love Mike. I think his playing was so unique. His voice was so unique, and he was such a big part of that thing. And unfortunately, he sort of gets retroactively kind of written out of the script sometimes.
Well, I remember being annoyed. I think, you know, things were getting bitter. They were bitter a lot there. When I remember hearing Eddie go, I had to show him what to play. I wrote all those riffs, and I'm like, oh, come on. Did you really?
That was a bit heartbreaking, but yeah, even if you did, it's kind of like, I still think he was such a major part of the band. We've covered so many of the things on here, but I have like...
Oh, yeah. Back to the 90s.
Mike Dirnt is a great bass player. And then there's like a... With these open string things where he's kind of like going... Where he's kind of playing along, I go... It has a little bit of like Peter Hook in like... You know, like Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division and bands like that. Peter Hook's another one of my favorites too. But Mike Dirnt's a great bass player. It was like the weirdest thing. We were flying to Aspen to do a show. It's like in the airport at LAX, and you get on like a shuttle bus thing that takes you to wherever you go. And I sit down, and I'm like, that's Mike Dirnt from Green Day. But it was kind of like he was in a conversation with his wife or whatever, and I was kind of like, hey, you know, I didn't want to be that guy. Hey, I'm from Lanigan, Saskatchewan. I think he's a very underrated player. He's got a great tone. He's got a great feel. He's got a great thing. Oh, and I think we have to...
The Aux. We got to talk about the Aux.
You can't say enough about him. I mean, like in The Real Me... all that kind of stuff. He was a guy who was, again, inventing the wheel. I mean, I watched Townsend talk about what did he say? He reinvented the fucking instrument or whatever he said. I remember yeah, he did. He really, like, bass players before him were like, dum, 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 dum.
Right. Well, like my generation, if you got to be paying attention, this guy's going off on that song.
There's no guitar solo. It's a bass solo. Anybody who's paying attention just goes, what the fuck? What's going on here? It's like, you know, it's
right.
And I think that's part of the beauty of what he was. He was just like that guy. The other ones that I have written is like Doug Pinnick is one of those guys that I've always looked up to, and there's so much that he's doing that I think is really interesting. Is I put over my head only because I think the fact that he's going. And the bam, 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 bam. The guitar is like, if the bass had gone, would have been completely acceptable. But the fact that he's going, wow, no, 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 is playing underneath that and singing again. Another one of those guys that just makes you want to kind of quit because it's so damn good.
That's my favorite King's X song. It still is.
When I first heard that song, I was like, who are these guys?
Right?
I have like stuff like something like that. The bass player from the Free, they were teenagers when they wrote that song. And I go, every once in a while I hear it and I go like, what? Because his little bass solo is like quite cool, like really clever. And I'm like, whoever his name escapes me, but he's amazing. What else do I have on here? So I have like, you know, that kind of thing.
That's cool.
There's apparently two different bass parts. There's an upright bass and an electric bass. So one's going up and one's going down. So it creates this kind of weird, but again, that's like two chords in Wild Side by Lou Reed. Could have been Take a Ride in the Wild Side. We would have been like, that's acceptable. But the fact that that guy, whoever that is, created this kind of thing is pretty impressive. Oh, you know what? This is a good one. So Paul Simonon is one of those bass players where I'm always like, because it's punk rock, a lot of us kind of go like, oh, he did this and he does, you know, very simple things. It's like, yeah, but I think that the London Calling album has such a massive impact on me because it was amongst my first sort of punk rock experiences as a kid where I was like, it opened up a whole other world because it's easy to write these guys off as like a punk rock off as, well, those guys can't play. I go, I defy anybody to listen to London Calling, the song alone. Like the fact that the drums have this kind of 16th thing going on and then he'll change the feel in the middle of the verse. The chords are very unique. And some of it might be a case of that the fact that he's playing an F over the C chord is very weird.
Right.
But it creates this real tension in it.
It's interesting, yeah. How about Mr. Waters?
Of course. I find Roger to be very inspiring in so many ways, but
well, Money's weird. It's 7/4 time. I mean, that's odd and cool, right?
I mean, that's the other thing too, is as a kid, I never got Pink Floyd. Like, I'll be honest with you, there's quite a few bands as a kid I would be like, I don't get this. But like later on, I would go like, oh, this is genius. You know, it didn't really affect me that much until later on. You know, then I get into a whole bunch of other weird stuff, but you know what? Give me a second.
Sure.
You talk amongst yourselves for a second.
I'll give you my last pick. How's that?
Go for it.
Okay. I got a bit of a backstory on this one. So it's 1977, Todd.
Okay.
I'm a young music fan growing up in British Columbia in the Okanagan. And all I'm listening to is Kiss, basically Aerosmith, Nugent, Deep Purple. That's about it. Whatever I could buy with my paper route money. And my parents are into music, mostly country, but they bought Fleetwood Mac Rumors on 8-track. This is where I'm going. And I remember being in the car, and when that would come on, I thought it was heavy, right? Heavy enough.
Yeah.
And that breakdown, John McVie doing that riff you just hummed, dude, I love it.
It's actually one of those ones that I almost put it on my list, but you're right. It is so effective. And I think it might be like an alembic $10,000 bass or whatever the hell those things are.
Right.
And John, another guy who's completely underrated.
Yes.
You know, I mean, just completely underrated. Here's one for you that we've completely overlooked. This is a 12-string bass.
Oh, nice.
It's a 12-string Tom Peterson Cheap Trick signature model by Waterstone, but Anyway, it's Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick is one of my heroes, and he's another one of those guys that I could throw a dart at.
I thought you were going to play Jeremy.
Well, actually, that I was going to play as well because of the 12 string. Yeah, no, I think that Jeff Ament, we just saw Pearl Jam recently, and I was reminded how fucking good he is and how, honestly, how influential he is on me as far as like, he's not just playing conventional stuff ever. He's playing a 12-string bass. He's playing a fretless. He's playing, he's all over the map, I think that's the kind of stuff that you find quite inspiring as a player. You kind of go like, oh, wow, you can really do almost, you can do a whole bunch of other things depending upon, what you're doing. Or how you feel like just approaching it, basically, yeah.
Okay, I don't want to keep you all day, man. Do you mind if we change gears and talk about some other things? Are you cool with that?
The only other bass player I want to mention is Dennis Dunaway from Alice Cooper. Another guy that I find, who does something, when he starts playing his part, you're like, I don't know where this is coming from or how he came up with that, but it's very unique. He's very much his own guy.
Good call. I never thought of that guy. What a band. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, man, let's change gears. You went out with Slash again. Rest of the world tour, supporting 4. You're in Mexico, South America, Japan, Europe. It wrapped up in April in Paris. How was this run for you compared to the others? Was it just another day at the office, or how was it for you?
Well, we kept saying we think it was our best tour. I don't think there's any way to really prepare for it because there's almost like you rehearse, you go through the process, you know your parts, you know your thing. And then I think we all came off stage in Mexico and we're like, oh, wow. I mean, people seemed excited to see us. It's kind of like, it's not a going through the motions. That's not the right word, but it's kind of like you just know your craft and you just get out there and you do it. And suddenly you just kind of have this epiphany of like, oh, people apparently were waiting to see us. Wow. Okay, great.
And man, those South American crowds are bananas, eh?
And that's exactly it. You're like, oh, wow. Okay. Wow. It was pretty mind boggling. And I think that, we all just kind of felt like it's sort of like, I don't know. I always say if you just keep doing it long enough, you sort of realize that people sort of catch up with you in a way, even though I think that we've been sort of embraced very early on. Miles goes off and does Alter Bridge, and then there's Guns N' Roses, and there's all the other things that we do. Everybody kind of goes off in their direction. You kind of feel like coming back and you go, oh, I wonder if anybody remembers this. You know what I mean?
Right.
The fact that they not only remembered it, but embraced it is like, oh, wonderful.
That's awesome. How cool was it having Wolfgang and Mammoth as the opener on half of those gigs? That must have been cool.
That was so much fun. I think the fact that we've been very fortunate to get to know Wolf along the way. And it's a weird, like, history in the making moment when you're like there hanging out, watching him play and do his thing. I mean, he's so talented. It's mind boggling, really. I mean, and the fact that it's happening in real time in front of me is, is just bizarre. But it was really fun. And it's always fun to be touring around with friends and, in a group that everybody likes each other and respects each other and has got each other's back, kind of thing. So, yeah, it was great.
How cool is it? Frank Sidoris pulling double duty. He was playing all night, wasn't he? Wasn't he playing with Mammoth and you guys? Or
he sure was. Yeah, he was a very busy guy. I don't know if that was just kind of like, one of those things where, well, Frank's got to go out and he's, doing Mammoth at this time. And it's kind of like, well, just put him on the bill. Yeah. I don't know if that was the solution or what the hell was going on.
Slash makes a call. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just make it happen. Okay. So I don't know if that's how that happened or what. And to be honest with you, I was, another thing about like, putting it all back together is that feeling of like, but Frank's doing that now. So how does that work? So there was a part in my mind that thought, well, it'd be a real drag to be doing it without Frank, but I guess we have to, or I guess that's, part of the conversation. It just sort of worked out. Frank's another one of those guys that I think is only showing a percentage of his talent within any of the groups we're in, because he's a very talented guitar player, and doing it in Slash, behind Slash, and then doing it behind Wolfie is sort of, he can only show so much, but I think that there's a matter of time before we show what's really up there.
I know you played bass on Sebastian Bach's new album, Child Within the Man. Dude, this is a strong, strong record. You got to be proud to be on this one. Like, it's really good.
It's funny because I sat on it for so long. Like, we made it probably 2 years ago, really. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is a great record. Like, I remember thinking, like, I can't wait for people to hear this because it's really strong. Like, I remember thinking, like, people are going to really dig this record. And when it finally came out, I remember kind of going, see, you know, it was kind of
Told
like,
ya.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. The first single is a no-brainer. And then everything after that is like, it's a lot of statement pieces of like heaviness or depth and, you know, and musicality. Elvis made the record, Michael Basquiat, who does, you know, Alter Bridge and Us and Tremonti and all that stuff. He's just such a talent. To me, just all the stars lined up. Jeremy Colson from Steve Vai's band playing drums. Devin Bronson played guitar. He co-wrote a lot of the record. He played with a lot of people and writes with a lot of people. And then we had like John Five plays on a song, Steve Stevens on a song, Orianthe's on a song. And Sebastian honestly hasn't missed a step. Vocally, he's strong as ever.
Now, speaking of all those artists, so is it Slash style where you guys are in the studio playing together, or is it more you come in and do your bass and then you leave? How did that work, the recording process?
It was during lockdown. So the four of us, Sebastian and Jeremy, myself, and Devin, all recorded together. I assume Steve did his thing, everything sort of remotely. I'm not sure. I wasn't a part of that, but those were sort of overdubbed after the fact. So, yeah. I believe Steve co-wrote his song, and I believe John Five co-wrote that song. So there were demo versions of those songs, and then I guess they did their parts after the fact, but I'm not sure, yeah.
I forgot it was COVID, yeah, because I had this fantasy for you, Tal, where you were actually in the room with Steve Stevens actually playing the song, you see.
I wish. Steve, I'm such a huge fan of Steve's, and he's been very good to me. I recorded this version of Atomic Playboys with my friend Luke from Australia, and you know, Steve was very complimentary about it. I think he's one of the all-time heroes, one of my all-time heroes, and he's just great. He's just the best, yeah.
And the videos, man, I got a kick out of the whole Maxell tape inspiration on that video. I was just howling.
Yeah, totally.
You're playing a Rickenbacker on that one, Todd. Is that a little homage to Geddy and Lemmy, or?
Of course, yeah. You know, it's funny because I actually ended up buying the Rickenbacker from Bruce Kulick. So I used this Rickenbacker of Bruce Kulick's on Apocalyptic Love back in 2010 on the song You're a Lie. And that song went on to be a #1 at rock radio. So when Bruce was going to sell the bass, I go, well, now I have to buy it because it was, you know, because of what it was. And I've taken it out on a few occasions. I took it out with Steven Adler on a few things, but I haven't really played it that much. It's a great player, and I love having it. But again, like Lemmy, and the Rickenbacker is a very specific animal. Yeah.
It's hard to say and you don't wanna hear. They didn't want us to know. We're gonna sound, try to find out a plan, how to understand the child within the man. Child within the man.
It was cool to see Rob Affuso behind the kit in those videos. That was surprising and also cool.
Yeah, back in the Sin City Sinners days, he came and jammed with us. So I kind of knew Rob a little bit through that. But yeah, when he came in to do the thing, I was like, I'm one of those guys that I still have this sort of soft spot and wish that those guys could get it back together. But
oh, I know.
It's so complicated, and having been in bands my whole life and growing up with, you know, the Beatles and Kiss and all your favorite bands, that you wish they could just, you know, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And I get it. Guns N' Roses as well. You know, I mean, there's sometimes you can put it back together in some form or another, and sometimes you can't. And, you know, as Sebastian's friend, I want everybody to be okay. I want everybody to be happy, you know.
That's right.
Make music, have fun, you know. I think I would love to see it together, but at the same time, I'm like, you know, I get it.
Let's let's change gears to another one of your projects, Heroes and Monsters. You got a dozen dates in July, the Raw Power Summer Tour. It's awesome you guys are in demand over there. I think it's fucking great.
And that's another example of what can happen during a period like COVID. I mean, the first thing I did was a thing called Minefield with the guys from Ace Frehley's band. And that was really fun. Like, I really enjoyed it. We never ended up touring or doing anything with it because it was literally like a bunch of guys just locked in their houses sending files back and forth. And then Heroes and Monsters happened. And I was like, it's Will Hunt from Evanescence and Steph Burns, who was in Alice Cooper and YNT and plays with Vasco Rossi now. It's one of those things where we made a record and we have every intention of making a follow-up at some point without really any sort of major plan invested other than let's just make some music. And if people want to hear it, then we'll figure it out. The fact that we're going back on the fourth time now, I'm like, okay, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound so flippant about it, but you're just kind of like, of course, I'd love to go play. Let's go do it,
It's a great record. Yeah, I really enjoy it.
Oh, thank you. I'm really proud of it. I mean, I've been going through the music again, and it's really fun. I mean, it's a really fun record. It's cool to be doing it as a power trio, and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of fun.
You got to talk those guys into playing over here, Todd.
Well, we're trying. Actually, we've been trying for years to try and get it somehow over to, at least LA, Vegas. Who knows? So, knock on wood. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to be able to do that. The other thing I did during COVID was Blackbird Angels with Tracy Guns, which again was never really intended to be toured or anything like that. And people are like, how many projects are you in? And go like, dude, during COVID, we were all sitting around for 2 years and I made some records. It's like, that's how that worked. Now that it's all over, it's sort of distilling down to Slash, Toque, and Heroes and Monsters,
You're leading me very nicely, Todd, for a little Toque talk.
I'm the segue king.
What do you got coming up this summer? What's going on with Toque?
We got a bunch of Toque dates coming up. Shane Gallus is touring Japan.
I see that.
And has been for some time. So what we're doing, I don't know if I'm blowing any big surprises or anything like that. Our friend Brent Fitz is moving to the drum kit, which is never a bad thing, obviously. He's a pro. And our friend Derek Frank, who played bass with Shania Twain and Gwen Stefani, is going to be playing bass. And he's an uber talent. We're very lucky to have him. So it'll be Corey, myself, Fitz, and Derek. It's going to be great.
That's cool. Fitz made me aware of him, and his funk albums are killer.
Monster.
He is awesome. Yeah, I love those records. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really talented and a really great dude. And he's not Canadian, but he's one of ours. Zach Throne has always been our go-to guy, who is currently out with Corey Taylor, so that sort of takes him off the reservation. We're very lucky to know so many talented people.
Okay, I'll let you go soon, man. I just wondered if you had any new music in Toque land. Is that something that's on the horizon? Or
it's so funny because that's another thing that was happening during lockdown, was a lot of back and forth with that. So we do have some new music floating around that we want to get out, and we have every intention of working on some newer stuff as things kind of, once Shane's back and things kind of quiet down, we'll get back to that for sure.
That's good to hear. And I'll see you at New Year's at the Deerfoot Casino, dude.
Yeah, you will. Off to Calgary.
That's right. Okay, before I let you go, I got one more question. It's a biggie. It's what everybody's talking about in the music world. It's AI. So I recently saw this clip of Rick Beato. You might have seen it. He's talking about it in terms of music and how concerning it is. He played a couple AI generated tracks and he couldn't tell it was AI. And that's scary.
It is really bizarre to me because I'm still the guy that wants to look at the vinyl, record and read all the liner notes. And, I remember the idea of like, how much effort we put into what's going to be on the cover of the artwork and all that kind of stuff. And obviously that's still a thing, but it's become less and less of a focus because it's so much more of the waveform that just sort of like, that's all that matters. Sometimes I feel like, being a musician sometimes feels like you're the world's greatest VCR repairman, where it's kind of like where the technology is moving on and but I'm really good at fixing VCRs.
Oh man.
And they go, well, we don't need VCRs anymore. Things have been changing for so long and coming at us that it's sort of like going to be this and it's going to be that. You kind of feel like every 5 to 10 years, someone says, this is the end. It's all over. And then somehow it sort of keeps moving forward. There's some kids in a basement somewhere right now creating music that's going to change everything. And that's just the nature of how this goes, is that there's something that can't replace the visceral reaction to hearing a song, and just hearing a band or seeing a band And when I say band, it doesn't need to be bass, drums, guitar, vocalist. It can be any version of that, but seeing it live, and especially when we're in this massive sort of world where it's becoming so much more auto-tuned and gridded and corrected, that sometimes, whether it's the White Stripes or Nirvana or whatever, that comes in and goes, and it's not about any of that. It's just that kids are reacting to whatever that is. And I think that that's part of the beauty of music, is that it's always evolving and always changing. So you throw into the factor of AI, it's the same idea of a computer generated beautiful woman. You know what I mean? Like, to me, I don't know that I would react to here's a picture of a beautiful woman. And I would go like, that's not a real person. I might have whatever sort of caveman reaction to it. But I think that once I realize that that's not a real person, I'd be like, okay, oh, that's pretty cool what they could do with technology. And I would move on with my life. I don't know that I would necessarily be music business company X has created this music. Check it out. I go, okay, well, I don't know that you can really hang your hat on this waveform. It doesn't look like anybody. I mean, they could create an avatar we can all go see or whatever. But I think the fact that it's not a real person, I think that our reaction to real, actual people is sort of going to trump the idea of just some, robot created thing that's sort of like, this is the pop star that they've created, and this is his songs or her songs, where we all go like, okay,
Avatars aside, it's tough to replace the live situation. You can't replace that, right? A live band's a live band.
I don't think it replaces the actual live experience. And I think that, I don't know about you, but I don't go down to like sweaty punk basements and watch bands play because I'm a grown ass man and I don't want to. But that's happening everywhere around us. And kids love it. They go to it. They get off on it. And the same ways that we did in our day, in my opinion, we inevitably react to that kind of stuff viscerally. We just kind of go, whoa, that's cool. I really feel like the long-term thing that always works is genuine music that comes from people who are singing it and creating music about something that we can relate to. I believe that there will be a world of both. You know what I mean? Like, I think that inevitably the creating the pop star and writing songs for them and putting them out there is replaced by, although that will probably still exist too, is augmented with the idea of an AI version of that will go out and do that. I think that the interesting thing about technology and the interesting thing about life is that we have no idea what's coming.
That's right.
And we've always been terrified of AI, whether it's musical or otherwise, Skynet and all things that can come from that. But
Skynet, yeah.
But I think that, there's part of me that kind of feels like it's very interesting because I'm not an artist, painting or otherwise. I have seen AI created album covers and AI created artwork. I go, wow, that's really interesting. For a guy like me who has never put a brush to a canvas, could put into an AI program, it's a girl in a field staring up at a starry sky, and it will create that. And I can augment that in whichever fashion I want to augment that. There are artists who do struggle and have killed themselves their entire life to learn to do that should completely offend.
Absolutely.
And I understand that, because in my world, it becomes like, we want it to sound like a Todd Kearns song, but like he's 19, and it's 2025 or 2027 or whatever fucking year you're creating this in. Right. And then I go, okay, well, that's weird. And that's a little bit kind of like scary. But I'm not the kind of person that sits around worrying about like, well, that could be this and this could be that. I got too much going on to really think about that.
Right.
We were having a conversation with my guitar tech the other day, and he goes, well, all I know is that AI can't do my job loading the truck and moving stuff from here to there. So my job is secure. And I go, you're absolutely right.
Well, yeah, it depends what kind of job you have, because it is going to put people out of work, right?
And that's what I say about being the world's greatest VCR repairman. I mean, if you haven't figured out a way to transition, we're all screwed. And I think that comes down to, if the day comes where it's like, there is no place for me to be doing this anymore, then that is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, there's a part of me that's, I look around at my friends who are in their 70s and still playing music, and I go, that's the goal. That's the goal, to just keep going and keep moving. And if things shift into like, that's not a thing anymore, we have replaced an entire world of 72-year-olds out there playing music with AI, then it is what it is.
For me, it's the word disclosure. Like if it's a song on Spotify
Yeah.
and it's AI, it should say that. They shouldn't be trying to trick me or whatever. That's all.
Well, I think the other creepy part about it is, not only will it create a world where a brand new Nirvana song or a brand new John Lennon song, it also creates a very likely possibility that when we are old men, there will be a brand new Bruce Lee movie, or Marilyn Monroe or James Dean. And it's 100% possible that the estates of these people will 100% go like, yeah, great, go make a James Dean movie. And we're going to be like, that's James Dean. Like that is 100% his voice. That's 100% what he looks like in the 21st century making a movie. It's like, there's a part of me that's fascinated by that, but also a part of me that goes like, I don't think that's
Right.
weird. That's weird.
It is. There's a weirdness to it for sure. Okay, Matt, I've kept you way, way long enough.
My phone's on the verge of dying, so I should probably...
Okay, awesome. Okay, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining me, Todd. I love when you swing by. It's always a blast to talk to you, man.
It's my pleasure, man.
Okay, and if you want to know what Todd's up to, well, if you don't know what Todd and his cats are up to, check him out on Instagram, Facebook, and X. He's everywhere.
Everywhere.
Check out his website, too. They got some cool shit, just like I got on right here. He's got hockey jerseys to coffee, man. He's got it all.
Exactly.
Thanks to you guys for tuning in. Thanks for hanging with us. Post your top 10 bass riffs in the comments. We'd love to see what your favorites are. You can find us on all the socials, wherever podcasts are broadcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, kids. I need more subscribers. And until next time, on behalf of Todd and I, keep rock alive. Peace out.
Later.
Elvis has left the building.